When a young man is kicked out on his 18th birthday, his stepmother tells him his only inheritance is a worthless equipment shed on a forgotten piece of land. But what he discovered inside wasn't just about the past, it was about to build him a future he never thought possible. If you've ever felt lost or underestimated, this story is for you. So stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're all just trying to find our way home. The key felt cold in my hand, colder than the morning air. It was old, iron and pitted with rust, the kind of key you see in movies, the kind that opens a chest or a secret door. This one just opened a shed. My inheritance.
Brenda had practically thrown it at me, the metal clinking sharply on the polished floor of the entryway. "Happy 18th, Leo," she'd said, her voice thin and tight, like a wire about to snap. "You're an adult now. Your father's obligations are settled." She said it like she was closing a ledger, a final, uncharitable entry in a book she was glad to be done with. The lock on the front door clicked behind me with a sound of absolute finality. I stood on the porch of the house I'd lived in for 10 years, a house that had never once felt like a home, with a duffel bag at my feet and a single, rusty key in my palm. The bag contained everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book my dad had given me, a phone with a cracked screen, and $74 in cash. The key, according to Brenda, represented a half-acre of forgotten land and a dilapidated equipment shed in the middle of nowhere. It was my grandfather's, willed to me specifically. Everything else, the house, the savings, my father's actual legacy, was now hers. "It's worthless," she'd added, a little smirk playing on her lips. "Full of junk, but it's yours. Now get off my property." I didn't argue. There was no point. For the 2 years since my dad died, I had been living on borrowed time, a ghost in the hallways of my own life. I was a loose end she was legally obligated to care for until the exact moment the clock struck midnight on my 18th birthday. And Brenda was nothing if not precise. I walked down the long driveway, the gravel crunching under my worn sneakers, and didn't look back. The sun was just starting to burn off the morning fog, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched out like grasping fingers. It felt appropriate. My own shadow was long and thin, and for the first time in my life, it was completely untethered. I had nowhere to go but forward, toward a place I'd only heard about in stories my dad used to tell. A place Brenda called worthless. The bus station was a bleak, concrete box that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I bought a one-way ticket to a town called Northwood, a green smudge on a map 2 hours away. It was the closest stop to the address written on the crumpled deed Brenda had tossed on the hall table along with the key. As I sat on the hard plastic seat, waiting for the bus to depart, I replayed the last 2 years in my head. The quiet grief that settled over the house like a permanent shroud after Dad's funeral. The way Brenda's polite tolerance slowly curdled into open resentment. The small things first. My dad's favorite mug disappearing from the cabinet. His photos being replaced with bland landscapes. Then, bigger things. The talk of selling the house, of downsizing. The way she'd look at me, her eyes calculating, as if I were a line item on an expense report she couldn't wait to zero out. My grandfather, Arthur, had died 5 years before my dad. I remembered him as a quiet man, with hands that were always busy. He smelled of sawdust and metal and earth. He could fix anything. A broken watch, a sputtering engine, a child's toy. He lived on a few acres of land out in the country, in a small house he'd built himself. The shed, I vaguely recalled, was his workshop. My dad used to take me there on weekends. While they worked on some project, I'd wander the property, tracing the creek that ran along the back edge, watching hawks circle in the wide open sky. Those were the only memories I had that felt truly solid, truly mine. Everything else felt borrowed. Now, all I had left of that time was a key to a place Brenda assured me was collapsing under the weight of its own neglect. The bus groaned to life, its engine a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. As it pulled out of the station, the city began to fall away, replaced by sprawling suburbs and then, finally,
by stretches of open highway flanked by green and gold fields.
I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the world slide by.
I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But it was joined by something else, a flicker of something that might have been curiosity, or maybe just the absence of dread. For 2 years I had been waiting for the axe to fall. Now it had. I was out. I was alone. And I was heading toward the only thing in the world that was mine. It didn't matter if it was worthless. It was a place to start. The journey was a slow unwinding of the tension that had been coiled in my shoulders for years. With every mile that passed, the city with its sharp angles and cold surfaces dissolved behind me. The bus moved from the 6-lane interstate to a 2-lane highway, and then to a county road where the pavement was cracked and trees formed a dense canopy overhead. Sunlight dappled the road, a shifting mosaic of light and shadow.
I was the only one left on the bus when the driver called out, "Northwood Crossing! End of the line for you, son." He looked at me in the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of pity and curiosity. A kid with a duffel bag getting dropped off in the middle of nowhere wasn't an everyday occurrence. I thanked him and stepped down onto a patch of gravel at the side of the road. There was no station, just a faded wooden sign that read, "Northwood, 3 miles," with an arrow pointing down a smaller, even more neglected-looking road. The air was different here. It was thick with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and something floral I couldn't name. It was quiet. Not the muffled, background hum of the city, but a deep, living silence, punctuated by the buzz of insects and the distant call of a bird. I checked the address on the deed again. It was another mile down this road. I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag on my shoulder and started walking. The silence was unnerving at first. I was used to noise, to the constant presence of other people, even if they were people who wished I wasn't there. Here, the only sound was the crunch of my own footsteps on the gravel. I felt exposed, small under the vast blue sky. But as I walked, a different feeling began to take root. This wasn't the hostile emptiness of the city. It was a peaceful emptiness. It was space, room to breathe. After about 20 minutes, I saw it. A rusted mailbox, half hidden by overgrown weeds, with the faded, peeling numbers that matched the deed. A narrow dirt track, more of a suggestion of a driveway than an actual road, led into a thicket of trees. I pushed my way through a tangle of thorny bushes and followed the track. The trees opened up into a clearing, and my heart sank. Brenda hadn't been exaggerating. The house my grandfather had built was still standing, but just barely. The paint was peeling in long strips, the porch sagged dangerously, and several windows were boarded up. A large "No Trespassing" sign was nailed to the front door, along with a notice from a real estate company. Brenda was already moving to sell it. My inheritance, the shed, stood about 50 yards behind the house. It was worse. It was a simple, wood-planked structure with a corrugated tin roof that was rusted through in several places. It listed to one side, as if a strong wind might finally convince it to lie down and die. The weeds around it were waist-high, and a thick, gnarled vine had wrapped itself around one corner, its tendrils creeping up the wall like skeletal fingers. Worthless. The word echoed in my mind. She was right. It was a pile of rotting wood on a patch of forgotten dirt. For a moment, I just stood there, the hope that had been a tiny flame in my chest sputtering out, leaving behind a cold, gray ash. I felt a surge of despair so sharp it almost buckled my knees. This was it. This was all I had. A ruin. I took a deep breath, the country air doing little to calm the frantic beating of my heart. Giving up wasn't an option. I had $74 and nowhere else to go. This ruin was my ruin. I waded through the tall grass, the stalks scratching at my jeans. As I got closer, I could see the details of the decay. The wood was weathered to a soft, silvery gray, but in places it was dark with rot. Wasps buzzed around a nest tucked under the eaves. The door was a single, heavy plank of wood, held shut by a massive, rusty padlock that looked as old as the shed itself. This was it, the lock the key was for. I pulled the key from my pocket. It looked ancient, formidable. I slid it into the lock. It grated, refusing to turn. I jiggled it, pushed, pulled. Nothing. It was frozen solid with rust and time. Frustration welled up in me, hot and bitter. I kicked the door, a stupid, childish act that only succeeded in sending a sharp pain up my leg. I leaned my forehead against the rough, splintery wood, defeated. I was locked out of my own inheritance, my own worthless, crumbling inheritance. I sank to the ground, my back against the door, and just sat there for a long time, watching dust motes dance in the shafts of sunlight cutting through the trees. What was I supposed to do now? Sleep in the weeds? Go back to the city and live on the streets? The sheer hopelessness of it all washed over me. I thought about my dad. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about how they could both fix anything, and how I couldn't even open a single, stupid door. After a while, the self-pity burned itself out, leaving a dull ache behind. I stood up and looked around. I needed to think practically. I needed to get inside. I walked around the perimeter of the shed, searching for another way in. There were no windows. The walls were solid, save for the places where the planks had started to separate. I peered through a crack, but it was pitch black inside. I came back around to the front and stared at the lock again. It wasn't about force. It was a machine, a mechanism. My grandfather's voice, a faint echo in my memory, surfaced. Don't force it, Leo. Understand how it works. I looked around the clearing. Near a pile of rotting firewood, I found a discarded oil can, the old-fashioned kind with a long, thin spout. It was empty, but when I shook it, a few thick, dark drops fell out. It was better than nothing. I carefully worked the spout of the can into the keyhole and squeezed, trying to get the last dregs of oil into the lock's mechanism. I did the same to the shackle. Then I waited. I gave it 10 minutes, tapping the lock gently with a rock, hoping to work the oil deeper into the rusted tumblers. Then I tried the key again. I inserted it slowly, gently. This time, it slid in a little further. I wiggled it, feeling for a purchase. There was a faint click. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift inside the lock. I held my breath and began to turn. It resisted, groaning in protest, a horrible scraping sound of metal on metal. I applied slow, steady pressure, putting all my weight into it. My knuckles were white, my arm trembled with the effort. And then, with a final, loud crack that echoed in the quiet clearing, the shackle sprang open. The padlock swung free. I had done it. A wave of relief, so potent it felt like a drug, washed through me. It was a small victory, but it was a victory. I pulled the heavy lock off the hasp and took a deep, steadying breath. I grabbed the rough wooden handle, pulled the door toward me, and stepped out of the sunlight into the cool, musty dark of my new home. The air inside was thick and heavy, smelling of dust, decay, and time itself. It was the kind of smell that coats the back of your throat. For a few moments, I couldn't see anything. My eyes, accustomed to the bright afternoon sun, were useless in the gloom. The only light came from the open doorway behind me and a few thin slivers that pierced the rusted tin roof, creating ethereal beams in the dusty air. As my vision slowly adjusted, the interior of the shed began to take shape. It was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet. Brenda was right. It was full of junk. Old canvas tarps, stiff with age, were draped over lumpy shapes. Rusted metal barrels stood in one corner. Shelves along one wall were crammed with paint cans, clay pots, and stacks of what looked like old magazines,
all of it coated in a thick, uniform layer of gray dust. The floor was packed earth, cold and damp under my feet. It was a tomb for forgotten things. Disappointment settled in my stomach again, heavy and cold. This wasn't a workshop. It was a storage closet for everything my grandfather didn't want, but couldn't bring himself to throw away. I nudged a tarp with my foot. It was covering a lawnmower, the old push-reel kind, its blades seized with rust. Another covered a stack of bald tires. It was all worthless. I felt a fool for the small spark of triumph I'd felt just moments before. Opening the door hadn't revealed a secret. It had just confirmed the depressing truth. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and walked deeper into the shed, my footsteps kicking up little clouds of dust. I ran my hand along a workbench that stretched across the back wall. It was solid, made of thick, heavy timber, but its surface was buried under a clutter of jars filled with screws and nails, tangled coils of wire, and tools so rusted they looked like ancient artifacts. A single, bare bulb hung from a wire in the center of the ceiling, its filament long dead. There was no power, of course, no water, no comfort, just dust and decay. I was about to turn and leave, to just sit outside in the sun and figure out what to do next, when my eyes caught something out of place. On the far end of the workbench, partially hidden behind a stack of rotting seed catalogs, was a small metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. Unlike everything else in the shed, it was relatively clean. There was dust on it, but it was a light layer, as if it had been wiped down not too long ago. Or, more likely, as if it had been placed here more recently than everything else. Curiosity piqued, I cleared away the catalogs, their pages crumbling in my hands. I lifted the box. It was heavy, solid. I set it on a clearer spot on the bench and worked the latch. It was stiff, but it opened with a satisfying metallic clank. I lifted the lid. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed cheesecloth, was a stack of envelopes, tied together with a simple piece of twine. On top of the stack was a single folded piece of paper. I picked it up. The paper was crisp, new. My name was written on it, in a familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. Leo. It was my grandfather's hand. My heart started to pound, a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. My hands were trembling as I unfolded the note. The note was short, just a few lines. Leo, if you are reading this, then you are 18, and things have gone just about how I figured they would. I'm sorry I'm not there to give this to you myself. Know this first, you are not alone. And this place is not what it seems. Your real inheritance is here. Start with the letters. They will explain everything. Be strong, son. I always believed in you. Arthur. I read the note 3 times, the words blurring through the sudden film of tears in my eyes. He had known. He had anticipated Brenda, my isolation, my desperation. This wasn't an accident. It was a plan. A message in a bottle sent across 5 years of silence, washing up at my feet at the exact moment I thought I was going to drown. I untied the twine around the letters. There were at least a dozen of them, the envelopes thick and heavy. They were all addressed to me. The top one was marked, Number 1, on your 18th birthday. I sat down on an overturned bucket, the only place to sit in the entire shed, and carefully opened the first envelope. The letter inside was several pages long, filled with my grandfather's neat, blocky script. He started by telling me he was sorry for leaving me, sorry for what my father's death must have put me through. Then he got to the point. I couldn't leave you the house, Leo, he wrote. Brenda would have sold it out from under you in a heartbeat. The law is on her side there. Money, cash, it can be taken. It can be spent. What I've left you is something she can't understand and therefore can't value. Something she would dismiss as junk. He went on to explain the shed. It wasn't just a shed.
It was a front. "Look at the back wall, behind the workbench," the letter instructed. "The third plank from the left, about waist high. There's a knot in the wood. Push it. Push it hard." I stood up, my legs unsteady, and went to the back wall. My fingers traced the rough wood of the planks behind the workbench. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. My eyes scanned the third plank, and there it was. A dark, circular knot in the grain of the wood, no different from any of the others. It looked solid, a part of the wall. I hesitated for a second, feeling a sense of disbelief. This felt like something out of a book, not my life. Then I remembered the cold finality of the front door locking, the pity in the bus driver's eyes. My life was already a story I didn't want to be in. Maybe it was time for a new chapter. I placed my thumb on the knot and pushed. Nothing happened. I pushed harder, leaning my weight into it. Still nothing. Doubt crept back in. Maybe he was just an old man, and this was a faded memory that wasn't quite right. The letter was in my other hand, crumpled slightly. Push it hard. I braced myself against the workbench, placed the heel of my palm against the knot, and shoved with all my strength. There was a deep, wooden groan, and then a sudden, soft click. The knot sank into the plank by about half an inch. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then, slowly, silently, the entire section of the wall, the workbench and the shelves above it, swung inward, revealing a dark opening. My jaw went slack. It was a hidden door, a secret passage. A cold draft carrying a different scent, cleaner, like oil and metal and shaved wood, flowed out of the darkness. My grandfather hadn't left me a shed. He had left me a secret. Now I have to pause here for a second, because this was a turning point. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt completely cornered, where it seemed like all the doors had been slammed shut in your face, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the way forward is hidden. Sometimes you have to push on a wall that everyone else tells you is solid. And if this part of my story, this moment of finding a hidden door when all seemed lost, resonates with you, I'd ask you to consider subscribing to this channel. This community is for people who know what it's like to have to look for the secrets, for the hidden paths. We're here to share those stories and remind each other that hope is real, even when it's hidden behind a wall of junk. Your support helps me keep telling these stories. Now, let's get back to what I found behind that wall. The darkness behind the secret door was absolute. I stood there for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs, a mixture of fear and wild, electric excitement coursing through me. My phone was in my duffel bag. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking so much it took me 3 tries to turn on the flashlight function. I aimed the bright, white beam into the opening. It wasn't a room. It was a set of steep, narrow wooden stairs leading down. The air that drifted up was cool and dry, a stark contrast to the damp, musty air of the shed. It smelled of machine oil, solder, and cedar. It smelled like my grandfather. Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the opening and started down the stairs. The secret door swung shut behind me with a quiet, satisfying thud, plunging me into total darkness save for the beam of my phone. The world of the dusty, neglected shed was gone. I was somewhere else entirely. The stairs ended on a smooth, concrete floor. I swept the light around me, and what I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. I was in a basement, a workshop, but it was unlike any I had ever seen. It was a long, rectangular space, maybe twice the size of the shed above it. The walls were lined with pegboards, every square inch covered with tools. Not the rusty, forgotten junk from upstairs,
but pristine, specialized instruments hanging in neat, orderly rows. There were tiny screwdrivers, calipers, lathes, polishing wheels, soldering irons, and countless other things I didn't recognize. In the center of the room stood two massive workbenches made of gleaming maple wood. On one, a half-finished project sat under a cheesecloth cover. On the other, a high-intensity lamp was angled over a green jeweler's mat, a pair of magnifying glasses on a jointed arm poised over it like a curious insect. The place was immaculate. It was clean, organized, and felt less like it had been abandoned and more like its owner had just stepped out for a cup of coffee. This was my grandfather's real workshop. The shed above was a decoy, a carefully constructed illusion of neglect to hide this sanctuary. A sanctuary he had left for me.
I walked over to the main workbench and pulled the cloth off the project. It was a clock. A beautiful, intricate skeleton clock, its brass gears and cogs exposed, a delicate dance of mechanical precision. It was only partially assembled, a ghost of what it was meant to be. This was what my grandfather did. He wasn't just a handyman who fixed lawnmowers. He was a horologist, a clockmaker, an artist. I spent the next hour exploring the workshop in a daze, touching the cool metal of the tools, running my fingers over the smooth wood of the benches. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. In a small, climate-controlled cabinet, I found dozens of finished pieces, clocks of all shapes and sizes, intricate music boxes, and delicate mechanical automata, little birds that would flap their wings, a ballerina who would twirl. These weren't just objects, they were masterpieces, each one a testament to thousands of hours of patience and skill. My grandfather, the quiet man I remembered puttering around in his shed, had been a genius hiding in plain sight. In a corner of the workshop, I found a small cot, neatly made, and a small desk. On the desk was another metal box, identical to the first. I opened it. This one wasn't full of letters, it was full of cash. Neat stacks of $100 bills, bound with paper bands. I sat down heavily on the cot, my mind reeling. I didn't count it, but there had to be tens of thousands of dollars there. Enough to live on for years. Enough to be safe. Tucked beside the money was a small, leather-bound ledger. I opened it. It was a record of sales. My grandfather had been selling his creations to private collectors all over the world. The prices listed next to each piece were staggering. He hadn't been a poor, retired handyman. He had been a successful, sought-after artisan. He had built a life, a career, a legacy, all in secret, right under everyone's noses. And he had left it all to me. I fell back onto the cot, the ledger open on my chest, and I finally let myself cry. I cried for my dad, for the years I had lost with him. I cried for my grandfather, for the secrets he had kept and the incredible gift he had left me. And I cried for myself, for the lonely, scared kid who had stood on a porch that morning with nothing but a rusty key, who had just discovered he had inherited a kingdom. The grief was a storm, but when it passed, it left a strange kind of peace in its wake. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a loose end. I was the keeper of my grandfather's legacy. But with that realization came a new, heavier weight: responsibility. What was I supposed to do with all this? The money was one thing. It was survival. It was a shield against the world. But the workshop, the tools, the unfinished clock, that was something else entirely. That was a question, an invitation. I spent the rest of the day in the workshop, sitting at the desk, reading the other letters. Each one was a piece of a puzzle, telling me more about his life, his work, and his hopes for me. He wrote about his passion for clockmaking, how he found peace in the precision, in creating order out of chaos. He wrote about my father, about his pride in the man he had become, and his sorrow that he hadn't been able to protect him from his own bad choices, namely, marrying Brenda. "Your father saw the good in people, Leo," one letter read. Sometimes he saw it even when it wasn't there. I tried to warn him about her hunger for things, for status. But he was in love. After he was gone, I knew she would see you as nothing more than an obstacle to what she wanted. He explained how he had built a secret workshop after his retirement, how he'd set up a trust to transfer the deed to the shed and the half-acre to me on my 18th birthday, a legal maneuver so airtight that even Brenda's lawyers couldn't break it.
He had spent the last years of his life preparing this refuge for me. The foresight, the planning, the love, it was overwhelming. He had seen the storm coming and had built me an ark. The final letter was shorter than the others. It was labeled number 12, the choice. In it, he laid out 2 paths for me. The money is yours, Leo. No strings attached. You can take it, walk away from this place, and build a new life for yourself anywhere you want. Go to college, travel the world. No one would blame you. It's more than most people get as a start. Or, he wrote, and I could almost hear his quiet, steady voice in the words, you can stay. The tools are here. My notes are in the desk. Everything I know is in this room. You have my hands, Leo. I saw it in you when you were just a boy, the way you took things apart, the way you needed to see how they worked. It's in your blood. You could learn this craft. You could finish the work I started. You could make it your own. It won't be easy.
It's a life of patience and solitude. But it's a good life, an honest one. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. The choice. Walk away with the money and be free, or stay and take up a legacy I knew nothing about. For 2 years, my only goal had been to survive Brenda's house. I had never allowed myself to think about the future, about what I wanted to be. I had no dreams, no plans. And now, my grandfather had given me 2. Both were more than I had ever dared to imagine. That night, I slept on the cot in the workshop, surrounded by the silent, waiting tools and the faint smell of cedar and oil. I slept more deeply than I had in years, the steady, quiet presence of my grandfather's work a comfort in the dark. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in my entire life. I made a pot of coffee on a small hot plate I found in a cupboard and sat at the main workbench, staring at the half-finished skeleton clock. I traced the graceful curve of a brass wheel with my finger. I could see the file marks, the tiny, precise adjustments my grandfather had made. This wasn't just a machine, it was a piece of him. Taking the money and leaving felt like a betrayal. It felt like taking the cash out of a wallet and throwing the pictures away. This place, this craft, this was the real inheritance. The money was just the means to protect it. My phone buzzed on the workbench, a harsh, alien sound in the quiet workshop. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Leo Vance?" a slick, professional voice asked. "This is Markham from Sterling Realty, representing Brenda Vance." My blood ran cold. "I'm calling about the parcel of land you've inherited adjacent to your father's property. As you may know, we have a developer who is extremely interested in purchasing the entire estate, and your half-acre is, frankly, a bit of a snag." He went on, his voice oozing a practiced, insincere charm. He told me the developer, a company called Omnicore, was prepared to make a very generous offer for my unproductive land. He named a figure. It was a lot of money. More than what was in the metal box. Enough to make me forget this place ever existed. "It's a fantastic offer, Leo," Markham purred. "A chance for a young man like you to get a real start in life. All you have to do is sign a few papers. We could have the money in your account by the end of the week." The choice. It wasn't a theoretical question anymore. It was here, on the other end of a phone line, wrapped in a real estate agent's smooth pitch. I looked around the workshop. I looked at the tools on the wall, the unfinished clock on the bench, the neat stacks of my grandfather's notes. This was my start in life. It wasn't a number in a bank account. It was a place, a purpose, a promise. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm sorry? Markham asked, his tone shifting from friendly to annoyed. Did you say no? I said no, I repeated, a little louder this time. The property is not for sale. Son, with all due respect, you're sitting on a rotting shed in the middle of a field. This offer is more than generous. It's a miracle. You should seriously reconsider. I have considered it, I said, a new confidence hardening my voice. It's not for sale. Not now. Not ever. Please don't call me again. I hung up before he could reply. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline, from the sheer, unadulterated power of saying no, of making a choice that was entirely my own. I knew it wouldn't be the end of it. Men like Markham and companies like Omnicorp didn't take no for an answer. But I didn't care. Let them come. This was my ground, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to defend it. The first thing I did was find a lawyer. Grandfather's letters had mentioned an old friend of his, a man named Samuel Bell who practiced law in Northwood. He was retired, mostly, but the letter said he'd help me if I was ever in a jam. Finding his office was easy enough. It was a small, dusty room above the town's hardware store. Samuel Bell was a man in his late 70s, with kind eyes and a handshake as firm as oak. I told him everything. About Brenda, the shed, the secret workshop, the phone call from the developer. I showed him the deed and the letters. He read them carefully, his expression grim. Arthur was a smart man, he said when he was done, looking at me over the top of his reading glasses. He saw this coming a mile away. The deed he set up is ironclad. That half-acre is yours, free and clear. They can't force you to sell. He explained the situation. Omnicorp wanted to build a luxury housing development. My half-acre was small, but it was right in the middle of their planned access road. Without it, the project was much more complicated and expensive. They won't give up easy, Samuel warned me. They'll try to bully you. They'll offer you more money. When that doesn't work, they might try to find legal loopholes, claim the property is a blight, a public nuisance. They'll try to wear you down. I'm not going to sell, I said, my voice firm. A slow smile spread across his face. Good, he said. Your grandfather would be proud. Now, let's get you set up. We'll file the deed officially with the county, put Omnicorp on notice that any further contact should go through my office, and we'll start the process of getting the utilities turned on for you. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. With Samuel's help, I used some of the cash from the box to open a bank account, to pay for the legal filings, and to get an electrician to run a line to the shed. The moment the lights in the workshop flickered on for the first time, bathing the room in a clean, bright light, it felt like a resurrection. I started cleaning. I aired out the shed, patched the roof, and cleared the weeds. I bought a small fridge and a microwave. I made the cot in the workshop my bed. It was a strange, solitary existence, but I wasn't lonely. I had the letters. I had the work. I started small. I read my grandfather's notebooks, which were filled with detailed diagrams, chemical formulas for finishing oils, and philosophical musings on the nature of time. I learned the names of the tools, how to clean them, how to sharpen them. I took apart one of the simpler music boxes he'd made, studying its intricate mechanism, and then, painstakingly, I put it back together. It took me 3 days. When I finally got the last screw in place and turned the key, the tiny, perfect melody filled the quiet workshop. I felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost hurt. I was learning. I was clumsy, I was slow, but I was learning.
I spent my days in the workshop and my evenings reading the books my grandfather had left on a small shelf, books on physics, engineering, and art. I was building a new life, piece by piece, gear by gear. The fight with Omnicorp continued in the background, a low hum of bureaucratic warfare. They sent threatening letters, which Samuel handled with dry, witty responses. They tried to file a complaint with the town council about the unsafe structure on my property, but Samuel was ready for them, showing up to the meeting with an independent engineer's report certifying the shed was sound. I even got a visit from Brenda. She drove up one afternoon in her luxury SUV, the tires crunching on the gravel I'd laid down. She got out and stared at the shed, her face a mask of disbelief. "What is this?" she demanded, gesturing at the patched roof and the cleared yard. "Markham told me you were refusing to sell. Are you an idiot, Leo? This is your one chance to have a life." "I have a life," I said calmly, not moving from the doorway of the shed. "You're living in a shack. You could have $500,000. It's not about the money, Brenda." "Of course it's about the money," she shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "It's always about the money. What else is there?" I just looked at her. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a profound pity. She would never understand. She couldn't see the value in anything she couldn't spend. She was the one living in a shack, a big, empty house filled with things, but no meaning. She finally left, sputtering threats and insults, her car kicking up a cloud of dust as she sped away. I never saw her again. Months turned into a year. I fell into a rhythm: work, study, eat, sleep. I made mistakes. I ruined a piece of expensive brass. I broke a delicate tool. But with every mistake, I learned. I started working on the skeleton clock, the one my grandfather had left unfinished. It was the most complex thing I had ever touched. It was a conversation with him, across time. I'd study his notes, look at the piece he had been working on, and try to understand his intention, to see the next step in his mind. One day, a local man named George stopped by. He was a farmer from down the road, a contemporary of my grandfather's. He'd heard I was living in the old shed. "Your granddad was a good man," he said, leaning against his pickup truck. "Quiet, kept to himself, but he could fix anything. Fixed my tractor once with nothing but a wrench and a piece of wire. Said he was just a tinkerer." He looked at me, a knowing glint in his eye. But I always figured there was more to him than that. Glad to see someone's keeping the light on. His visit was the first crack in my solitude. Soon, others followed. People from town, curious. They'd heard the story about the kid who turned down the big developer. They brought me pies, offered to help me with yard work, asked if I could fix a broken watch or a music box. I started taking on small repair jobs, just like he did. I wasn't just hiding in his workshop anymore. I was becoming a part of the community. I was becoming my own man. One cool autumn evening, 2 years after I first opened the door to the shed, I placed the final piece into the skeleton clock. It was a tiny, impossibly delicate escapement wheel. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I had spent 6 months on this final assembly, following my grandfather's notes and my own slowly growing intuition. I attached the pendulum, gave it a gentle push, and held my breath. There was a soft, almost inaudible click, then another, and then, for the first time, a steady, rhythmic beat filled the workshop. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound of a heart coming to life. The clock was running. It was perfect. I stood back and looked at it, the brass gears turning in a slow, hypnotic ballet, the polished hands sweeping gracefully across a face that had no numbers. It was a collaboration, a legacy completed, a promise kept. In that moment, I understood what my grandfather had left me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the workshop. It was the knowledge that you can build a life of meaning and beauty out of things other people dismiss as worthless.
He had given me the tools to fix my own broken life. He had taught me that the most valuable inheritance isn't something you're given, but something you build with your own two hands.
The shed wasn't a worthless shack. It was a foundation, and I was finally home. This journey taught me that home isn't always a place you're born into. Sometimes, it's a place you have to find, or even build from scratch. It's about finding that one thing, that one person, or that one purpose that makes you feel like you belong in the world. My inheritance wasn't just a shed, it was a second chance. It was the freedom to choose a harder path that led to a truer life. It was a legacy of quiet strength, of finding immense value in places the rest of the world has written off. And as I stand here today, in this workshop filled with light and purpose, I know my grandfather's greatest creation wasn't any of these beautiful clocks. It was the future he built for me. And that is a gift beyond any price.
My story is just one story. But I know there are so many of you out there who have had to find your own way, who have had to build a life out of the scraps you were given. I see you, and I want to hear from you. In the comments below, I want you to tell me, what's the most valuable thing you've ever inherited that had nothing to do with money? Let's fill this space with stories of real inheritance, of the legacies of love and skill and resilience that truly shape us. Thank you for listening. If my story meant something to you, please subscribe and become a part of this community. We're all in this together, just trying to keep the light on.